joined NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, in 2015, and is the Director of Standards Development there. In her role, she's responsible for assuring the timely development of NERC reliability standards to effectively respond to and mitigate identified risks to the reliable and secure operation of the electric grid. As part of these responsibilities, Jamie emphasizes ability and a diverse and cooperatively driven team, and a never-ending pursuit of engagement with industry. Prior to this role, Jamie was a senior engineer within NERC, developing reliability assessments and implementing oversight of the compliance monitoring and enforcement program. And prior to joining NERC, Jamie served as a transmission planning engineer and bulk power dispatcher for the Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia. Thank you so much for joining us today. I met Jamie at a symposium, I think last year, and I'm personally very inspired by her. So we're very lucky to have her. You're going to do a presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So save questions for the end, but also bring your questions because she's here to talk to us. So you can take it away. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Hollis, and good to hear from you. And thanks for reaching out. I've been looking forward to this presentation all week, and actually not so much the presentation, but a conversation. We absolutely deal a lot in the consensus building space, run into a lot of challenges, and people kind of bring everything to the table, their own opinions, expertise, but also sometimes agendas and needs to support their clients. So there's a great deal of interest in what we do, but I'm very excited about this group because you're very much in line with what we're focused on, which is reliability and resiliency, and how we make sure that we're providing the service to customers, which is the whole point of this system. So I do have some slides. I hate going through slides sometimes. And it doesn't have to be wait till the end. I actually would like to encourage conversation. So if you have questions, I'm actually okay with you all jumping in the interim, and we can have some questions. Or if you'd like to hold to the end, we can do that as well.
Oh no, we're good. Yeah, go ahead and jump in here first. That's good.
Okay. I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. And this is some information that we can go through pretty quickly. Question.
I might need to allow it. Sorry, but there you go. Okay.
Share the screen. All right. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the ERO, or who we are as the Electric Reliability Organization. So this will just be a quick level set. What we've really been tasked to do is, and actually before I get into that, is our group, this committee, it used to be before we were a corporation, existed in like the 60s and 70s and throughout the 90s, providing a lot of expertise and consolidation of guidance towards industry. This was before we were recognized as this organization that can impose reliability standards. So after the Eastern Shore blackout 2003, very much there was a lot of interest in ensuring there was some form of electric reliability organization to ensure someone was focused on just reliability across the entire footprint. And this is North America. We don't really cover Mexico, just a small portion of Mexico, but our organization does extend through the United States, continental, and the provincial territories of Canada. So after 2003, by a legislative act, the Federal Power Act, and specifically Section 215 of that Federal Power Act, authorized the Department of Energy to create this electric reliability organization, or to assign it to someone who was able to be recognized as that authority voice, which was NERC at that time. So we have a contractual obligation with FERC, who's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They look at beyond just energy. So we're working a lot with our electricity staff to ensure there was one independent voice. We're not for profit. We are an independent organization. We do have to adhere to our governmental regulators. So we are under oversight of FERC. We do get audits actually from industry as well, making sure that we're adhering to our open and transparent process. So this is very much an interesting type of organization. There's nothing else like it in the world. There's a lot of organizations that build on reliability standards with us. So we're in contact sometimes with different countries and just what they've been doing. Australia is a really interesting example, just because of their footprint is just really condensed, but they have all of this open space as well. But just how they go about developing standards is in a very different way. So, and we're not just focused on standards. So I do want to get into some of that as well. But just in a nutshell, we were brought into existence by an act of Congress, but just due to the overwhelming need to ensure that there was someone who was focused on this as their primary goal. So there's some other things that we do. We maintain situation awareness. So there's a team that's on site, and they're routinely monitoring. They're doing event analysis reports. They're evaluating root causes, and then reporting on those findings and recommendations out to industry. Sometimes there's additional information that we need after the fact. We start seeing a lot of interesting type events. We start doing a little bit more digging, determine that the root cause is due to something that is some common mode of failure or some continual issue that has just been getting worse and worse. That's where we sometimes have to step in and institute some sort of reliability standard. But there's parts of the organization that are just wholly not even in contact with us, because they're very much focused on running these, and we review their reports, and they're just evaluating those real-time system conditions. In addition to that, we have assessments that are looking at forecasted future. So there's the seasonal assessments, the summer and winter assessments, and the long-term reliability assessment, looking at different areas across the footprint and determining what is the biggest issue that we have in each of those footprints. For some, it's capacity deficits. For others, it's wildfires right now. And then there's other places that we're seeing with what we've called large loads, or the computational loads, which is the data centers and cryptos, which I'll get to briefly. So upcoming seasons is very much becoming a little bit more of a notable report. I actually started at NERC in reliability assessments, doing data and running different analytics and creating reports. At that time, there were like 200-page documents, and no one was reading them. We thought they were great. But when you get down to the details, the brass tacks of what do people need to know, in addition to just attention spans shortening over time, there's a limited amount of time that we get with state commissioners, other regulators, and they don't have time for 200 pages. We have to provide them very condensed, concise, and correct information. And that's a challenge with some of us engineers who came up with being a little bit verbose. And putting more data down because we wanted to substantiate our findings. So these have actually become more notable. Where we used to not be recognized beyond the trade press, we've started to see ourselves in normal press, which is pros and cons of that. We expand our voice, make sure people see these concerns and the upcoming issues that we see building up on the system. But then there's also that concern of our worst nightmare being another blackout, something that was either something beyond our control, something that we didn't get exactly right, and some mitigation effort that we put forward. But really the biggest concern is that we were too late on something. And that's very much first and foremost on our minds when we're looking at what we have to do and this slate of resources that we have to work with. We have to prioritize risks. So the assessments and these evaluations from the other parts of the organization are really essential for us to be able to look down the 2 to 5 year pipeline as to what we see coming our way and what we might need to do in order to mitigate those and get ahead of things. So we are authorized to improve physical and cybersecurity. We do that through a variety of mechanisms. We put forward guidelines, and we deal with, of course, standards. Certifying system operators, we're ensuring that all system operators who do transmission operations or working with reliability coordinators, pretty much anyone who has their hands on the controls of transmission systems, who can open a breaker, isolate, some load pocket, or just for whatever reason have control, but they shouldn't. Or they're not, functionally registered for that particular type of activity, but have the controls available in office. We make sure that those folks are certified under a common set of expertise and experience. So we've got certification that we issue. We educate on risks. We have lots of webinars and workshops as well, making sure we're bringing people together to have these conversations. We develop guidelines and best practices if we need to. While I'm in reliability standards and, a big focus on NERC is reliability standards, it's not our first tool. It should really be kind of the last tool, because these things they can be a burden towards industry. We work in a space where we currently have 77 active standards, 10 of additional, which are regional standards. That's a lot for people to keep up with. Not every company has to adhere to all 77. If you have all of the functional registrations, like you own generation and you operate generation and you own transmission, operate transmission, plan the system, etc., there's a lot of standards to comply with. My first job out of school was with a municipality in the state of Georgia. I did system operations, bulk power dispatch, and went into transmission planning. We had one compliance officer. That's when I first started to get involved in NERC and started to see what the standards development process was, how legally dense some of the material was that I was not used to, and got a little bit more into that over the years. But it's really challenging to stay on top of all of this. I'm overseeing this department right now, and it's challenging for me to stay up on all of the details day to day with all of the projects. So I have to look at the high priority issues and what folks on the team are having trouble with, and making sure that we can move those things forward. But it's very challenging for industry to really stay on top of these. So we're really focused on making sure we're only moving forward with things that we need to make standards. In addition to the time components and the expertise component, just that whole resource tab is dollars. Whether or not you're compliant or not, you have to spend a great deal of money to become compliant, just through demonstrating through evidence that you haven't had an issue of non-compliance. This can be expensive. People go through consultants, and there's a whole business surrounding this. So we're really mindful of when we're taking things into reliability standards. We don't take it with lightly either, because these things are needed sometimes. We want to see reliability guidelines and that guidance and just the conversation really drive and motivate and get people to implement best practices and resolve these issues. That's not always what happens, especially when we're dealing with multiple people beyond just that entity. We've got original equipment manufacturers, we have vendors, we have supply chain issues, and these things extend beyond the capabilities or direct control of a entity. So it's going to be a little challenging as we go forward into this more complex and distributed world, how we're ensuring that we have line of sight on issues, and that the entities themselves have line of sight as to who they're all working with, and those points of entry into things that could cause them to be non-compliant. Compliance is not a goal for us, or determining people to be non-compliant. We're not for profit. Actually, stakeholders, the rate system that's put onto each of your electric bills each year is, I think it's 7 cents per annual per ratepayer. So it's a really cheap amount, considering, but at the same time, it means that we don't have a need to issue compliance. If we get through a year and there's not a single issuance of that, or any need to issue fines, that would be great. That means the system's operating well, and our audit teams are able to really prioritize and work on these things well. When it comes to issuing penalties, again, I was in compliance for 7 years before standards. It's not our goal to issue penalties. And if an entity just is quick to mitigate. Oh, I see a hand up.
Yes.
Yes,
Sorry.
please. Sorry.
I had one just kind of clarification question. When you're talking about system operators in this case, is that specifically utilities, or has that kind of expanded with increased DER and some generation resources that aren't necessarily owned by the utilities at this point?
Yes, good question. So when we talk system operators, we're looking at the bulk power transmission level. So those who are operating distribution level, which would be below 115, 100 kV, we're looking at a lot of distributed energy resources on rooftop, and those would be done by distribution providers, which is kind of down the distribution side of those feeders. So we're not looking at anything typically on the low side of the transformers that would go to the distribution network, but we've been having to more and more, but not for the operators, because we can still isolate that load and cut that off from the transmission side. We're looking at how people are using that data, but not for system operation certification. There might be a need to bring more people into the fold, but we're not at that point with the distribution side to require system operator certification for distribution engineers.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just on penalties, if an entity gets issued a potential non-compliance, we go through, mitigation and everything. If they're quick, they've already got internal controls in place to like either preventative, corrective, or detective controls. Those are the things that they do to ensure that something doesn't happen, whether it's a checklist or some sort of job aid or some routine review. There's a way to ensure that these things don't manifest again in the future. We take that into account. A lot of times penalties are reduced to zero if an entity is forthright, able to put forward, here's what we're going to do to mitigate this. We've already implemented these things, working with us to ensure that that is something that they've taken care of. Sometimes those get zeroed out because, again, the goal is not to make money here. The goal is to ensure reliability. So again, on reliability standards, the mandatory and enforceable, we define requirements for reliable planning and operation. One of the things we want to make sure that we're doing is having some level set of consistency. However, entities operate differently. They have different generators on their system. They have different needs. Some folks, depending on the biome that you're in, you can have differences with your vegetation management programs, et cetera. So how we're looking at standards is really objective based. We want people to have some flexibility in how they comply. So that's objective based, risk based, or performance based reliability requirements. What we're looking at a little bit more is resiliency based requirements, which we don't have any right now. An objective based requirement would be, you must ensure that you accomplish this study, or you conduct a study that evaluates these conditions. And if you could demonstrate the thresholds that you've applied to that study, or if you can demonstrate your method that you applied, your coordination with neighbors, and you can ensure that the study is consistently implemented, you've met that objective. If we have a performance-based requirement saying, don't have more than 3 of these things occur, or have no issues where your generators are popping offline when they need to ride through disturbances, then that would be a performance-based requirement. Risk-based requirements are a little bit more challenging. There's not a subjectivity that goes into those. From the auditor side, we more so need the entities to show their work. What are they determining to be their risk-based approach to ensuring X doesn't happen? We get into this conversation a lot when we're looking at the extreme weather standards, and we start getting into more of the conversation with how you're ensuring an adequate like physical security set of changes to a critical transmission station. Did you install ballistic shielding? Did you ensure that you've appropriately put in reduced points of egress and have sufficient monitoring in to detect, deter, delay bad adversaries for them physically attacking and taking out substations? That would be more of a risk-based approach. It's hard to achieve a particular performance with that. We want to be proactive, so we need to ensure that they've put some thought into how they've protected that station physically. So we facilitate the standards development process. And this is an interesting time to be in standards because we are about to wholly change our process. So this is still going to be somewhat the case, but we're going to be taking the pen to paper a little bit more on the front end. Because right now, we don't write the standards. One of the things that our department does very well is ensuring that we're bringing the right people into the room, presenting a diversity of opinions, making sure that we've got a reasonable approach put forward, and we're not just pushing our own standpoint. That can be challenging because we also need to make sure that they're meeting a particular objective, addressing the risk. So if we need to step in and say, this isn't going to effectively mitigate, or we're seeing a new risk that's coming from this language that's been developed, we'll step in. We've had to do that occasionally. It's not always goes over well with industry, but we do have a function and an obligation to ensure that we're mitigating these issues. So we facilitate this process. Anyone is welcome who's in industry, who has the requisite experience. If you are new and want to observe the process, anybody can observe actually in the public if they want to call in. All of our standards calls are open to the public, and the whole process is transparent. So developers will work with anyone who calls in on how to get more involved. If people are interested in particular standards or projects under development. That's stuff that we'd like to build interest on. I would love to say that we have 40, 50 people apply to each project to be drafting team members, but unfortunately that's not the case. In addition to just having less subject matter experts in the utility field, we're also seeing a lot of experts being kind of gobbled up by consultants and right now a lot of the big tech. So some of the utilities are struggling on having like strong planners and folks who are able to conduct these types of studies. So they're fully focused on their full-time job because this is a voluntary position and they have to take time off their normal day-to-day to do this. So while industry is a little bit tapped, that means that these drafting teams don't get staffed with like 10 people that we select out of a crew of 40 or 50. So we run into an issue sometimes where we've had to go back out multiple times for requests for nominations to join these projects. What's helped is prioritization, making sure that we're taking this slew of, I think, 23 active projects right now, maybe off of that number, and saying out of all of those, these are the 5 or 8 projects that we are prioritizing as high for this year. You look at nothing else, look at these projects. We've done some more on the communications front, but essentially the drafting teams are the go-to people. We work with them to develop the language. They're supposed to have the relevant expertise, and we'll hold the project from moving forward until we have that expertise on the team. They develop the specifics. I said I think a good reliability standard. The slides say strong, but I like to say good because we identify who, what, when, and we don't tell people how. And that gets back to the flexibility. We need to have very clear measures on how to demonstrate compliance. So if an objective or performance or risk is met, there has to be a clear measure for each one. The how doesn't really matter for us for that. As long as you can explain, walk through how you've done it, then that works. There's supposed to be some flexibility built into this construct. So entity facts and circumstances must be considered, must have flexibility. That's really, really important for us. If all entities were the same, that would be great. I came up in the Southeast in the state of Georgia. So we had again, a municipality that I was working with. We worked very extensively with Southern Company, Georgia Power. Southern Company is historically a vertically integrated company. If they need generation, they identify that in planning, they'll go build it. If they want to put in a new transmission station, they'll just go do it. With coordination with state and local officials, of course, for siting. But when it gets to like some of the market-based entities or some that only plan the system but don't own any generation or transmission, you start having these asymmetrical type of perspectives for what people need to do and what their business model even is. So it becomes really challenging. It's more interesting with foreign-owned generation and transmission assets. That would be outside US and Canada. So people who are investing in companies in the United States, specifically generation, that's a little challenging when we're talking about the cybersecurity side, and even more so when we talk about control centers that might be operating outside of the US or Canada. Those actually exist, and those are currently a real challenge because we don't have a law saying people can't. That extends beyond our authority. So we actually have to work a little bit more with our government, our federal counterparts on how we're going to be addressing those And I know our EISAC, which is our Electric Information Sharing and Analysis Center, separate from NERC, but like our sister company, they are fully focused on that coordinating and communicating. They run little war games. I heard a hackathon earlier. They do something similar, but on the cybersecurity attack front. That's one of the things that they're looking at as well. So it gets challenging getting these standard requirements to be clear and measurable when you have such a diversity of what we call entities or registered entities. And that's why we sometimes end up with words that are really challenging to parse, language that you need to get like 2 or 3 lawyers in the mix to determine what was meant, especially if you're looking back 2 or 3 years ago. What was the drafting team trying to do here? I would love to make things as simple as possible, make sure that we can provide folks clear path to compliance and addressing the risk. But there's a lot of concern sometimes as to how something might be audited, so some language gets tweaked here or there. But at the end of the day, we do end up with more stronger standards. We do end up with better reliability standard requirements because of this process. It's unique, as I said, but the more involvement that we have, the more comments that we get from industry, just the more people are involved is always beneficial. Where we're at right now are most impactful areas that we're really focused on, this decreasing centralization of resources. One of the things I saw a lot at the poster session that Paula's mentioned at the at GRID event last year, there was a lot of stuff about wildfires. The whole thing was about extreme weather and how we're ensuring resiliency during such a extraordinary time, especially as we see these conditions beginning to speed up, become more frequent, and of course more severe. So a lot of I remember the posters at that time were focused on specifically these centralization, decreasing centralization of resources, changing load, changing resource mix. It used to be, I would throw this analogy out of how I thought about the bulk power system. You know, we had the veins and arteries, and that would be like the bulk power 230, 500 kV lines, and then the capillaries would be like the distribution network. And just had this image of just that anatomy of our bulk power system. It was just this, things flow down and then outwards, and that is absolutely no longer the case. It hasn't been the case for some time. We're going to see even more changes start to speed up. We have generation now at every voltage class installed everywhere in different quantities. We have load now the size of nuclear power plants being installed pretty much anywhere on what was not planned to be an area for a gigawatt of load in one central location. It causes a huge amount of changes on not just the local area, but the whole interconnection in total. When you have such a change in, say, the dynamics of the system, all of a sudden you have this large reactive load. Those are AC units. They have a lot of cooling. They're pulling a lot of VARs, and you're going to have this depreciation of voltage in that area. So it's not something that people have planned for. It's something that we're seeing. Some entities are looking at doubling or tripling what they have installed for generation over decades in the next like 2-3 years, which is kind of mind-blowing to think about. It's hard enough to get siting for generation and transmission as is. And folks are having to think about, out of the past 50, 60 years, we've installed this much generation, and now we have to double or triple that in like 2 or 3 years. It's a wild time right now. This has never been a more interesting time, I'll say, and it's definitely one of our largest risks right now are these data centers and crypto mining centers. Not so much the EVs, that has kind of toned down in terms of where our concerns were with, say, the changing peak load hour and stuff like that. I can get into that. But the data centers is very much our concern. Yeah, more natural gas, more solar, more wind, more batteries, which is, I'm all for electrification, and I love these resources. If we had more base load, that would be great as well. But being able to match the load with matching generation is something that is a big concern. Also, as well as the cybersecurity risks, we're looking at people incorporating cloud technology. which is not new. Cloud has been around for a minute. The rate of change and pace of technology changes and the usage of AI. I'm particularly concerned about what people have been calling vibe coding. There's already been instances where we've seen like phone applications and things that have been programmed poorly, and personal information's been lost. If people are using AI to pull in their EMS data, which is their monitoring information from like their SCADA systems, that's going to be probably a little concerning if that information is leaving site to come back and then be processed somewhere else. That's going to be an area of concern. If we've got different tools that we're not sure how they're being used to inform operator decisions. As long as they're not making decisions right now, is there kind of where we're hanging our hat, like, there has to be some human in the middle, but we'll have to see how this continues, how the development of this continues, and how people start to incorporate this technology in the operations place. That's going to be a new era that we start to dig into. Supply chain, especially right now, there's always geopolitical events going on, but when we have concerns of downstream, or actually, sorry, I should say upstream, custody of assets that are being put in, we can talk to an entity and make sure that they're good with their vendors, but they're working with, say, Siemens, and then Siemens is working with some other chip manufacturers in the Philippines and in band. How do we ensure that every piece of every part of that system that's being developed, because all of these systems, the physical transformers and a lot of these devices are being built out overseas. How do we ensure that we've got that level of assurance of this physical asset is not bringing in some backdoor into like a large 500 kV network? That's something that we have to be very cognizant of. Digital attacks, of course, as well. How we ensure that we're not introducing, I think it was, SolarWinds was the one that it was a company that had just a firmware update, and just a typical update, and an intern at the company had just kind of logged in with it was SolarWinds 123 was their password. That firmware got hacked, and then that basically hacked version of that firmware went out to all of their clients and was extremely disruptive. That type of stuff is really concerning as well. So when we talk about digital supply chain, it's that control and access and provisioning of who's got access to these updates, these software firmware updates upstream, and that could be a whole skill set in its own. That's something that we're really focused on right now. We have a supply chain project that's open. And of course, not to bury the lead here, but one of the most notable concerns and one of the more challenging concerns is extreme weather. We can't build everything underground. What do we do in extended drought conditions? What do we do with low snowpack that decreases the amount of water reserves that we have? It might have to hold run of river. You might not have the ability to rely on hydro as much, which is extremely important in the southeast and the northwest as well. Wildfires, hurricanes, extreme cold, heat and cold temperatures, especially the disparity of like last week. I think it was 80 degrees here on Wednesday, and then it was like 50 degrees, and then the weekend went back up to 70s. Big sweeping changes. The extended drought, I think, is probably going to be the most challenging, especially as data centers get in the mix and are using a ton of water. We're going to have a lot of conditions that we're seeing with just inability to maybe cool some systems. Then, of course, hydro being really effective as well. So I went through a lot. We're about halfway through. I do have my contact information for folks as well. Anyone here is more than welcome to reach out. I'm loving this whole group right here. Just what your focus is. I'm very inspired by it, because I mean, you all are the future thought leaders of what we need. We need folks who are focused on resiliency. We need folks who are focused on community and what the point of this entire system has been built for. If it goes down, with the more that we rely on it, it's going to be a bad day if there's a blackout that extends for 2+ weeks. What we need to do is make sure that we're being resilient against those issues or those instances. If we can get to the point where we've got strong adaptive-based requirements, resiliency-based requirements, how are we ensuring that we're able to recover quickly and ensure that those essential functions are operating, at least during those types of conditions, keep the network up. That's where our focus is probably going to be over the next 10 years. And we can't slow climate change. We can't slow the impacts of extreme weather. So we're going to have to step up more in how we're ensuring that not just the bulk power system, but the whole distributed network is really set up to succeed and keep people afloat during these times of extreme weather. But with that, I'll just kind of pause and just rambling for a minute there and just see if there's any questions, just talk with you all. If they want to go back through anything in more specific, I can go into a lot more detail. But I love making this a conversation, especially what you're interested in. I'd love to go into more detail on that stuff as well.
I have a question. Can
Yeah.
you hear? Yeah. So I was just wondering, so usually when it comes to standards and compliance, there's a lot of stakeholders involved. So how does NERC usually deals with governance when it comes to these stakeholders? Like, you gotta convince them and have them on board that we will be auditing you, or we will be looking over governing you in some ways, getting some data from you. How does they navigate and convince these stakeholders that we need to govern you and then evaluate you and then tell you what to do? Like, how does that, I think, happens?
Yeah, those are timely questions. We just recently expanded out the criteria for what we'd consider to be registered generator owners. We've added a lot of new generation assets that we had a 75 kV or 75 MVA threshold for saying above that, we're going to register you, and anything below that, we're not going to register you. Obviously, that's no longer needed, or obviously that no longer works because we have so much more, solar that is below that and connected at different voltage classes. So we've had to create a new expanded registration. With data centers as well, we are creating a new registration, and we're doing that right now in some parallel efforts in probably the most ambitious timeframe that we've had here. But there's new people as well. Folks who come into the system, they just purchase some assets, or they change their functional registration and say, we want to do planning now. We have a whole registration team that works on ensuring that they've got a point of contact, making sure that they understand who their regional entity is. I didn't go into our structure with NERC oversees the entire ERO, but we've got 6 regional entities that work underneath us, with us. But NERC doesn't do any audits. We actually audit the regions who go and do our audits, who go and audit the entities. And for God, it's us, it's audits all the way down. But we have a great deal of concern right now where we can't actually get contact information from some folks because where do you go? So we've reached out to transmission owners. They have to have some interconnection requirements. So they have to have somebody to call. You can't just connect to the transmission system without a phone number, some conversation or contract. So we've had to go digging for this information. But once we do, registration reaches out, they walk them through the process. There's an onboarding that says, first of all, hi, here's who we are. And yes, you will have to comply with these standards. There's going to be a lot of that over the next couple of years as we bring more people in. But the consensus building process is kind of another component. But when it comes to the standards, there's the registration piece, making sure people are aware they're going to be audited at some point. The regions work with them on entity-specific basis. They develop these oversight plans to say, based off of your makeup, we're going to focus on these things for you. I said there's 77 standards. Let's say you're required to comply with all of them. Your region might audit you on 10 of them, or 5 of them, or 15 of them, and have you self-certifications for the others. If they deem that you're unable to be compliant with one and they're worried about your risk in a particular area, then they're going to prioritize that and bring it into scope of their next audit. There might be only a handful of standards for some entities just due to their makeup and size. It's risk-based. They say, here's what we're going to focus on for you. And they'll inform the entity that they'll tell them in 2 years, this is the schedule. We're going to come out and audit you on that. However, there are also spot checks. If we have a concern over a particular standard, we'll just call a spot check in a particular area, and all of the entities in that area will have to comply with that standard or that requirement. So we can go and do spot checks. They're not surprises. We still try to give as much information in advance as possible. We want people to be successful here. FERC will also go and do their own audits, at least in the US. And we'll join those as observers, but FERC is authorized to just conduct their own audits as well. So there's kind of 3 ways that you might get audited there, informed you're being audited, either through us through a longer schedule, a spot check, or FERC. If there's questions in the interim, it's not just, we're going to audit you in 3 years, good luck, we'll see you then. There should be a lot of conversations up till then, like, what do you want to see? What are the controls that you're looking for? They have a whole assurance team with each of the regions that work with the entities to say, here are some best practices we've observed. Here are some things that might work for you. No, we can't tell you in advance if you will be compliant, but we can tell you this is going to be beneficial for entities of like your makeup and size.
So I've just had one follow-up, so what happens when they are hesitant to do so? Like, how do you, convincing them that this is required and you're supposed to do it? Like, how does the outreach or like the understanding to them to understand, like, this is needed, this is how it's done? Because
When I first started in compliance, the first audit that I went on, there was lawyers standing next to the subject matter experts that would just cut in and say, nope, this is out of scope. And it was really closed off conversation. It was interesting. They joked about like putting things in our food. I've heard stuff about where they would change the temperature in their caucus room that they put us. They didn't do that to us, fortunately, but there was a tonal shift, I would say, over the years that I was there. There was a lot of effort from kind of top down with CEOs from both NERC and all of the regions to say, we need people to be more engaged with us. And how do we do that? So the relationship building is a huge part of this. Most of my job is talking now, which has taken me a while to get used to as a recovering engineer. There's been a lot of effort put into sitting down, walking through things with people, assuring that they understand that we've got their best interests at heart here. We're trying to make sure that we can bring them into compliance. When it gets to convincing them whether or not they're going to be audited, I haven't been in the room for a conversation where an entity has said and just been invasive on that front, but lawyers do get involved. If there's a just evasiveness or people are not responding, that's going to be something that's they will be fined and enforcement actions. I don't know of a situation where an entity has just not paid. I'm not sure exactly what would happen in those conditions, but I'm sure my counsel would know. But yeah, there would be follow-up on that. But we're trying to avoid those situations and conversations where it's kind of adversarial in nature. We're trying to make sure that we're bringing industry with us. I say this a lot, we can be right all day. We can have the most perfect standard requirements, but if we're not bringing people with us, if we're not able to convince people of what they need to do and how to work with us, or even just an opinion, then we're just yelling at a wall. It doesn't do anybody any good.
I had another question.
Maybe that one.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I was wondering if we could go a little bit more back to the drafting committees you were talking about. And I was curious kind of like what the like timeline for most of that is. And then also you were mentioning that you're like sometimes missing some expertise. So I was kind of curious, like, what is the typical makeup of those and like what are you guys missing or like really hoping that in the future you can kind of build out with engagement on those?
Oh, let me kind of share an example here then. That might just, while I'm kind of speaking to it here. On our website, which unbelievably got renewed, we now actually have one that's from the 2000s. I don't know if you all had seen our previous website, but it was interesting. It was being used as a database, and everyone held it very dear to their hearts. But for each of these projects, so here's our kind of list of active projects with the standards under development. We'll say for planning energy assurance, we put out a nomination request. We solicit nominations, and in each of these, we put out an announcement, but we also say, here's what we're asking for this particular project. So for this particular project, we were looking for people who had this amount of or this kind of expertise. You work with the planning coordinator, you understand TPL1, other tasks in planning for coordinating assessments and studies. There's not a huge amount of overlap between this one and say, I think the cloud project. It's going to be pretty different. Let me just pull that one up.
If you want us to see your screen, we don't.
Did I not show it? Sorry.
No,
Thank
it's
you.
okay.
Thank you there. So what I had done was I went to standards under development and I grabbed a project. So I talked to planning engineer assurance, but this one we're calling our cloud project, third-party services, people who are using third-party applications. How are they, assuring they have a strong physical and security for those. This unofficial nomination form, we put out that request for information, and this one we asked for folks who are familiar with our SIP standards, folks who had cyber assets, BES cyber asset definitions, familiarity with cloud architects, system administrators, etc. So for each project, we put out different expertise that we're looking for. A lot of our O&P standards are looking at some similar expertise, but we get nominations. People will they'll fill these forms out. They'll get references. We review them. We sit down and conduct interviews with each of the people who are nominated and determine what might be a good fit for the team. In addition, we're looking to see that we get a diversity of opinions. So we're looking for folks from across the footprints. If we had 10 people who were all amazing, but they only were in the Western Interconnection and working with WEC, we're not getting a representative drafting team. We need folks from Texas. We need folks from the Eastern Interconnection, and yes, Canada. So we'll just go back out for additional nominations until we get what we need, and we'll push not just through this, but through other forums. We've got a whole stakeholder engagement group. We work with the trades. We have routine calls with not just FERC, but with state regulators and some of the trade organizations as well. So EEI, the Electric Edison Institute, the North American Generator Forum, SEIA, which is the Solar Energy Information Administration. I think it's administration. SEIA. Anyway, there's a couple trades that we work with, and that's how we can really poke industry to help us get more people. And then we get them together and we start having conversations. I think there was a first part to your question, but just in how we kind of put these teams together, this is our normal process.
The other thing I was wondering is like, what's the typical timeline for like once you get your team put together?
Yes, that we put here in as well. Things that are high priority projects, we started to say, here's this was actually 2003. We did this one, so we weren't doing this at the time. Big newer project. We started to put what the expectations were because it's a great question and that's what people want to know. How much time is going to be needed if I want to commit to this? So if I pull up INSM, this is a project we started in 2025. We now have that saying Oh, this one was a timeline because it was exactly 12 months. So this is not a good example. But we'll include information saying we're going to meet 2 to 3 times a week for a few hours, 4 to 8 hours per week on our high priority projects. Those are the ones that we're going to put a lot of resources into. We're going to have more in-person drafting team meetings. We might have some workshops. Anything that's a high priority, we're putting a lot more time into. And I think no, we don't put it on the page. We pull up the nomination form for this one. We started this year. Time commitment, 2 face-to-face meetings per quarter, on average 2 full working days each meeting. Conference calls scheduled as needed to meet, and that's generally like 2 times a week. While things were out for ballot, sometimes we'll go on hiatus and let people have a break. We had what we called No Draft December 2 years ago because everyone got burnt out. We got a lot of good feedback from people asking us to at least give a little bit of break during the holidays. But that's generally the time frame on our high priority projects. On some of the lower priority projects, some are not meeting right now. Some are meeting like maybe twice a month for just a couple hours. So the medium and low priority projects are less of a lift for people who want to be able to participate on a team, but not be able to have the time to just sit for 4 or 6 hours a week, contributing to the project.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a question that a student sent me. He would like to know, he says, does NERC work directly like for the US government as a company, or is it owned, or is it its own corporation contracted by the government? So if you wouldn't mind answering that for him.
Yeah, we are an independent organization, so we're our own corporation. We have our own board, but we are, as the ERO, which is the Electric Reliability Organization, essentially contractually obligated with FERC. We have essentially an MOU with FERC that highlights our responsibilities, our rules of procedure, outline what we shall do, and we file any revisions those with FERC. So they oversee us. If we are not doing our job, they would potentially remove us as the ERO and put someone else in. Don't see that happening anytime soon because of course we hold to all of the rules very diligently. Some of them are how often we'll do assessments. Sometimes we are directed to put in a new or revised standard within a certain period of time. Like I mentioned, this INSM project, we had 12 months. And that's something that FERC will require us to do. But under the Department of Energy is FERC, and it's that Federal Power Act that authorized FERC to authorize us to be the ERO.
How does that work with like outside of the US? Like you mentioned some stuff in Canada and Mexico.
So not so much with Mexico. I think it's just a small area. I think it's like the Baja California a little bit, and that's somewhat of a radial piece. I think for Canada, whenever we are developing a project, we ensure that we're working with our Canadian counterparts. We have a stakeholder body that is our standards committee. Our next process will be a little bit different, but we'll ensure Canadians are they're involved. Canada's interesting. I almost said Canada. Canada's interesting because each province actually has its own structure, like governmental structure for this. So we're all underneath the FERC, but each of the provinces has their own regulatory authority, essentially. So within Saskatchewan, it's SARA, and Manitoba Hydro is or Quebec is the NRC. I'm not gonna try French. But we share the projects upcoming with them. They'd like to participate, and then when we completely complete a project, file it with FERC, we send it off as well to the provincial governments so they can review it. They each have their own process for reviewing it and determining whether or not they need any revisions or not. And then they will put kind of their own version on their website for each of their entities.
Thank you.
For auditing, just to kind of follow on there, we don't have the authority to issue penalties, but we do audit. The regions do work with the provinces to do these audits. I think they're all doing this with some observers from the regulatory body in, say, Alberta or British Columbia will join an audit and just observe, or they'll read the report following WEC's audit. And if they see any need to follow up, they will. But generally, they've worked really well with the regions and us on conducting those audits. But the actual enforcement authority that could levy fines would be provincial governments there. It gets a little tricky when we're dealing with how some different entities operate, and of course, we're really reliant on a lot of that kind of free flow of electricity between, or I should say, across the border, especially to Canada. There's a lot of power that flows south in the summer. Okay. We're almost at time, so I guess I don't know if we have any other questions or anything else.
I've got a wrap-up question if we need one.
I also had
Okay.
one.
I think we do have a few more questions. Maybe I'll just say really quickly.
I'm cool to stay on if you all would like to.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining for the seminar. If you need to hop off or go, you can go ahead and do that. But yeah, for those of you who still have questions, please ask them.
Sure. Okay. So I just had this question, like how has transparency when it comes to exposing to public and like involving them part of the standardization really helped NERC over the years? Like, do you feel like there has been a difference over the years, like from where it started to where it is now, and how transparency when it is like, yeah.
Yeah, well, the whole thing's really changed. It used to be probably just a lot of engineers and folks who worked with, I guess, your traditional utility that were in the room, and now we're dealing with a very diverse set of stakeholders. So the transparency is hard to demonstrate sometimes. We'll have conversations with FERC or the regions, and people think we're having like secret meetings. We have to have these conversations in just coordination, and then we bring forward, here's what we talked about, here's what we want to make sure everyone's like aware of, and what we're going to need to do here. It's gone over well. I think a lot of people are still overwhelmed by the amount of information just in standards. You could spend all day, every day, like I do, and it's still a lot. And then there's also all of the guidelines and guidance that's coming out from other departments. So it can be challenging, I think, when we're talking about transparency. Often people don't want to see all of it. They want just the condensed version. And some people don't want the condensed version. They want more details. So we try to start with, here's the high level, and let people kind of drill down where they feel like they want to get more information. And that's helped, I think, a lot. And people have generally been pretty forthright in sharing that they appreciate the fact that we come to the regional workshops. We like to come share information to webinars. Love instances like this where we can come talk to people and just kind of share what we do.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can wrap things up here, unless anyone has any last questions. Okay.
I'll just say thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really was looking forward to this all week because I'm used to people that are mad at me, and you guys weren't. So this is great.